Welcome to the show, Sharon Salzberg.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm so psyched to get to talk to you. I've heard about you for many years, as I was just saying before we hit record there, that I was a Buddhist practitioner with under Reggie Ray, who was, one of Trungpa Rinpoche's students. And so I've heard about your work and Jack Kornfield's work for many years. And anyway, I just really want to start by saying thank you for what you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Just, getting people more self-aware, more able to be with their experience, more mindful. I mean, it's big. We all need that. So Sharon, how did you get into well, first of all, how would you describe yourself now? When someone says, what do you do? Or who are you? How do you describe yourself?
I describe myself as a meditation teacher and an author.
Cool.
And of course, I've been teaching now for 47 years, so
Wow.
as my friends say, I got into meditation before it was cool.
Yep.
And way before that. And, so I've also gotten to trace the kind of evolution of how people react when I say I'm a meditation teacher.
Yeah.
Because I came back from India in the mid 70s. I came back in 1974. And if I were to say it, through that decade, really, I'm a meditation teacher, people would kind of go, oh, that's
you're kind of weird.
Yeah. And now
you're hip.
Now I'm very hip. I'm really I'm so, do we still say hip? I don't know.
Right, exactly.
Do we still say cool? Whatever. I'm that.
Yeah. I'm just so curious. I wasn't planning on this question, but what do you think of all the meditation apps now and the Calm and all these? What's your take on these?
I think it's good. Basically, it's a delivery medium, and that's it. All depends on the quality of who's doing the input. You can have very fine teachers, and there are on many apps.
Yep.
And it was so different in my time, and so to speak. I was 18 years old. I was a university student. I went all the way to India to find a teacher and a method because I was going to college in Buffalo, New York. I looked around Buffalo. I did not see it anywhere.
Right.
And I had to do something, I felt, in order to learn how to meditate. And so I went all the way to India, and people don't need to do that anymore. And
yeah.
And that's wonderful. It's a remarkable thing. There are difficulties, of course. And one of the difficulties is if an app or whatever it means you're using doesn't allow you to ask questions. There's no means to do that. Some actually give you a coach, which is wonderful. And you just get to ask your questions.
Yeah, great. I want to get into why asking questions could be so important. And before I do that, if we rewind your life a little bit, I'm curious what the story is in terms of how you got into meditation and why not yoga or something else.
Yeah, I mean, yoga wasn't really prevalent then either. It wasn't to be found easily. I went to college when I was 16. I grew up in New York City, and the public school system liked to have people skip grades, so I skipped a bunch of grades. I went to college when I was 16. Took an Asian philosophy course in my sophomore year in college, I think simply because there was a philosophy requirement, and it fit into my schedule. So there were a couple of things in that course that were life-changing. One was the Buddha's very unashamed and unafraid acknowledgement of the suffering in life. It's like I had, like many people do, a very traumatic childhood, and mine, like many family systems, was one where this was never really spoken about. And so I didn't know what to do with all of those feelings inside of me. And in hearing the Buddha's message, what I heard was, oh, you're not so weird. You're not so different. This is a natural part of life. You belong in a way, which I had never felt I really had. And then I also heard in the context of that class that there were methods, there were tools known as meditation. And if you could do the meditation practices, you would end up being a lot happier. And I looked around Buffalo, like I said, I didn't see it anywhere. And I created an independent study project, which I presented to the university, saying, I want to go to India for a year and study meditation. And they said, okay.
Amazing.
So off I went.
Wow. And then when you got to India, because you hear of people like, oh, I'm going to go find a spiritual teacher and go to India, and you hear lots of different variants of that story. I'm curious, what was the story for you? What did you find there? Did you find what you were looking for?
I did, actually. It wasn't right away. Actually, before I left Buffalo, Trungpa Rinpoche, who certainly his work, and he came to Buffalo. It was his first trip to the U.S. I don't know who did his tour schedule, but he ended up in Buffalo and speaking at a different college, which I went to, and I was leaving in a few days with a group of friends to go to India. And I had a tremendous desire for kind of the direct, practical how-to. I wasn't really interested that much in the philosophy, or certainly not into kind of becoming a Buddhist or rejecting anything else. I wanted like the straight stuff. So Trungpa Rinpoche gave his lecture, and then he asked for written questions. So I wrote out a question. I said, a small group of us is leaving in a few days for India to learn meditation. Do you have any suggestions on where we should go?
Okay.
So he had like this big pile of questions in front of him, and he like pulled it out and he read it out loud, and he paused for a moment, and then he said, I think you had perhaps best follow the pretense of accident. And that was it. It's like no addresses, no handy monastery guidebook.
Okay.
You had perhaps best follow the pretense of accident. And it was exactly like that.
Wow.
I got to India. We went to Dharamsala because I heard the Dalai Lama lived there and he was a Buddhist. And I thought, oh, maybe I could learn meditation here. And certainly there were great, great teachers there. But it was one of those situations where things just don't work.
Yeah.
Like, I'd go to the class and the translator was at the other end of India for 2 weeks. And then I'd come back and then, we'd go to the class and the Lama had gone to the dentist who was also at the other end of India. And then and I was actually at a Tibetan restaurant one day and I overheard a conversation between these people talking about an international yoga conference, which was going to be happening in New Delhi. So I thought, oh, great, I'll go there. That's where I'll meet my teacher. And I went there, and it was like a completely dispiriting affair, the low point of which was when these yogis and swamis were like pushing and shoving against each other to be the first to grab the microphone and speak. So
Oh, wow.
I thought this is just hopeless. But one of the speakers at the conference, and I still actually haven't asked him how in the world he ended up there, was Dan Goleman, who at the time was a graduate student at Harvard studying meditation. And Dan spoke, and at the end of his talk, he mentioned that he was soon heading to this town called Bodh Gaya, where he was going to do an intensive 10-day immersion retreat in meditation, which was known for being direct, practical, really the how-to. And I thought, that's it. And I was right. It was it. So I followed after Dan to Bodh Gaya, and that's where I began.
Amazing. Wow. And was it a led course by a teacher that you connected with?
Yeah, my first teacher was S.N. Goenka. He had just left Burma recently.
Oh, that's right. You're one of the people that got to actually study with Goenka.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and in my first retreat, which was a magical just gathering, Danny was there, Joseph Goldstein was there, who became my great colleague. Ram Dass was there. Many people who are still very close friends.
Wow. And what was it like for you just sitting on the cushion in a way for the first time, right? In a formal way. I'm so curious, because I remember my first sit and it was not comfortable.
It was many things for me, that first sit. It was very painful physically.
Yeah.
It was, kind of a shock that I really couldn't concentrate after all. But underlying everything, there was this immutable sense that there was truth there. Mm-hmm. For me, there was truth there in that process. There was truth there for me in that worldview, and that this was something I had to continue pursuing.
Yeah, that's incredible. And how many, this is kind of more biographical for the listeners here that don't know you. And then how many years did you study with Goenka, and at what point did you sort of launch your own trainings and teachings?
I studied with Goenka. Well, that first supposed academic year, I actually stayed a little longer, as many people
Nice.
did. And I stayed maybe 14, 15 months, went back to Buffalo, did what I needed to do to get 2 years of independent study credit and actually graduate from college. Then I went back to India. So within that first journey, I studied with Goenka, but I also started studying with a man named Manindra who had a somewhat different approach and methodology. And I started studying with this woman named Deepa Ma, which is a nickname, Deepa's mother, Deepa Ma. And then I started studying with some Tibetan teachers. But my fundamental practice was within kind of Burmese lineages. And I never thought I would ever teach. So in those days, it was so different. You know, it wasn't like a career path or
Right.
something like that. And, I came back to school, finished, went back to India. And then in 1974, I was leaving India to come back to the States for what I was absolutely positive was going to be a very brief trip home where, I needed a new visa and all this other stuff. And then I was going to go back to India to live the entire rest of my life. And
Hmm.
I went to see this teacher, Deepa Ma, who was living in Calcutta. And I told her, I'm going back home. I just come for her blessing. And I'll be back soon. And she said, well, when you go back, you'll be teaching. And I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. And I said, no, I won't. I said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. I thought it was the most ludicrous idea in the world. Like, how? How could I possibly be capable of that? And then she said two things to me, which were kind of mind-blowing. One was, you really understand suffering. That's why you should teach.
Mm.
And it was the first time, certainly, I'd ever thought of everything I'd gone through as a child as bearing that kind of value in a way.
Right.
And then she said to me, you can do anything you want to do, which you're thinking you can't do it. That's going to stop you. And I left her room. She lived up in what we would call a tenement building, walked down these 4 flights of stairs thinking, no, I won't. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to teach. And came back to the States and ended up in a short while in Boulder where Trungpa Rinpoche had just started Naropa Institute. It was the inaugural summer. Joseph Goldstein was teaching there, sort of Ram Dass's teaching assistant. A number of friends, just descended upon there. Our joke, although it's actually true, was that Joseph was the only one with a job in an apartment. And so at one point, literally 9 of us moved into his 1-bedroom apartment. And then Jack Cornfield was living down the hall. And Joseph was invited to stay on through the second session of the summer and teach. And I stayed on with him as kind of his teaching assistant. And then we got invited to teach a month-long retreat. So we did. And then we got invited to teach a 10-day retreat. So we did. And then, it was some combination of Joseph, Jack, and I, and a few other teachers. And one day I woke up and I thought, oh, she was right.
Right.
That's really true.
Yeah. And were you interested in pursuing any other sort of more traditional career paths at the time? Were you like, oh, I got to go be an accountant, or you were just totally all in on this path?
Yeah, I was totally all in. I think probably I dreamt of maybe someday I could write, which I never thought I could, and now I do, of course. But no.
Yeah, just curious. Yeah, it's amazing. I have a segue, just a weird question I want to ask because I think it'd be interesting for the listener. When I was in my 20s, I decided to go kind of find myself, and I went to Costa Rica in Central America to figure my life out because I was feeling depressed and disconnected. And I had the stuff, I had lots of friends, I had things, but I was very discontent inside. And I couldn't sit on the beach. I would find these beaches that were just deserted, and I'd just sit there, and I didn't know how to meditate. And I could last about an hour of just sitting quietly, not in meditation, just sitting with my arms folded over my knees or whatever, just lazily slumped over. And I just kept looking at my watch. And in retrospect, what I learned, I guess, looking back is I couldn't be with myself. I didn't know how to be with myself. I was bored, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to descend upon the situation, knowing all that you know now, what would you tell that guy who was just sitting there and couldn't be with his experience? Like, what would be the instruction?
Well, I think it's very common. I think there was just a study pretty recently out of the University of Virginia where they asked people to like go into a room and just be with themselves,
Yeah.
and see their thoughts. No method, no instruction. Just don't read. Don't. I don't know if people even knew meditation, but just be.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult for a lot of people. And the only other option you had, aside from simply being, was to administer this mild electric shock to yourself, so at least something was happening. And some large amount of men, most particularly, chose that option.
Interesting.
Rather than simply being. And I thought of that very often in these times where so many people have been forced to just be with themselves, and how difficult it feels when you don't feel you have the tools, or you don't have the resource, or even just the structure. So that's probably what I would have told young you. It's like, hey, this is a hard way of doing it. How about if we try this? And then offered you some method or another.
Yeah. And because so many of us are so disconnected from our experience, and then we have massive amounts of distraction and medication in the form of distraction, away from our experience. We got our phones. I can instantly look at my phone and not be with myself all day long, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always noise. And for the listeners listening that can maybe relate to that, and it's hard for them to sit still, what is your simple instruction there to like learn how to just take the teeniest baby step towards, okay, I'm going to just sit here for 5 minutes and be with myself?
I would say either resting your attention on the feeling of the breath, the actual sensations of the breath, going in and out wherever you feel it most predominantly, both because that's a centering exercise and because the main part of that kind of training is what happens after you get lost, after you get spun out, or after you fall asleep or whatever. We think we have to like hold on tight to the breath in order to have our minds not wander.
Right.
But really the most important moment happens after you have already wandered. And that's the practice of letting go and beginning again, bringing your attention back to the feeling of the breath. So it doesn't matter if your mind wanders 1 billion times. That's not a sign of failure. It's like that's exercising the muscle.
Yeah, totally.
And so it would be either the breath or maybe some other central object. It doesn't have to be the breath, but it's that awareness of, oh, I'm gone, letting go and coming back. That's really important.
Yeah, that's so cool to hear you just remind me of that basic instruction. And it reminds me of when a couple, because we're a relationship podcast, and we do have a lot of spiritual practitioners that listen, and a lot of healers and a lot of people that are into growth and development. And I'm reminded of when my wife and I get into a fight, for example, or our students or people get into a conflict with someone. My instruction to them is always, it's not the conflict that's the issue. It's, are you willing to come back in relationship, right? And it kind of reminded me of that. Would you say there's a connection, or what would you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's a nice way of thinking about it in life, because what I always say is that, we exercise that muscle, letting go and coming back, or letting go and starting over. That's really what resilience is. And we exercise it in meditation, not to become a great meditator, but to have a different quality of life. And
exactly,
I think about it within oneself when you've made a mistake or you've blown it, or something has happened, you've fallen down, and you have to either pick yourself up or let others help you up. You have to start over, or you need a course correction. We have a certain aspiration, we have a certain vision. It needs to shift. And how many times a day is that real? A lot, And so that's again, it's like exercising a muscle of being able to let go and start over. And it's beautiful to think about it in the context of relationship.
Yeah, sweet. When I over the years of meditating myself, I started to notice some things. I just want to get your opinion, given your vast experience, is a lot of meditators, in my experience, sometimes use meditation as a way to escape their life. And I don't think that's the purpose of meditation. Can you speak to that? If we're trying to use meditation to just feel good and the rest of my life is kind of in shambles?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that's uncommon, even,
Uh-huh.
you know, and certainly conceptually, it's not uncommon because many people think that is the purpose of meditation, is to get some placid, peaceful, calm state, which will be uninterrupted. And that's just unreal. We certainly can have many peaceful, placid, calm states, but everything changes all of the time, and it's not the ultimate goal anyway. Meditation itself is much more about relationship. It's not, say, the presence or the absence of thought, it's how we are relating to that thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the absence of very painful emotion, even. It's how we're relating to that emotion. How present, how balanced, how kind are we in the face of it? So it's all about relationship, and we tend to judge ourselves mercilessly in terms of the content, not in terms of how we're approaching it or relating to it. And so that usually takes a lot of reminding again and again and again to come back to that better kind of approach.
Yeah. It's almost seems like these wise old sages that taught us how to meditate and develop this was someone somewhere along the way saw the value of being able to witness objectively our experience. And that seems such like a critical life skill right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if someone doesn't, I mean, I guess if a listener doesn't know what we're talking about here, or again, I'm just looking for kind of a first step, is it really just how do we begin a relationship with our experience when we're so fused to it?
Well, I think that's the movement, that's the training in effect. I was talking to somebody not long ago who had been talking to his therapist, and his therapist had said to him, "You are not your thoughts," which was a complete puzzle. I was like, what does that mean? Of course I'm my thoughts. And I said, well, if you think of your thoughts as a visitor, for example, the question becomes, how do you relate to that visitor? And I use the example of an instruction we sometimes use when somebody has like a really nagging, incessantly critical voice within.
Yeah.
And what we say is like, maybe give it a name, give it a wardrobe, give it a persona. Because then you really get to see, well, how am I relating to it? So I go on to say that I called my own inner critic Lucy, with apologies to any Lucy's listening, based on the character in the Peanuts comic strip. Because I'd once seen a cartoon, and in the first frame, Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown, and she says, "Oh, Charlie Brown, what your problem is? The problem with you is that you're you." And then in the second frame, poor Charlie Brown says, "Well, what in the world can I do about that?" And then in the third and final frame, Lucy says, "I don't pretend to be able to give advice. I merely point out the problem." And somehow somebody had left this cartoon on the desk in a room I was moving into. And somehow whenever I walked by that desk, my eye would fall right on that line. The problem with you is that you're you, because that Lucy voice had been so predominant in my earlier life. But what I've seen through the process of the practice of meditation was, for example, something great happened for me very soon after I saw the cartoon. And my very first thought was, it's never going to happen again. And I could greet that thought with, "Hi, Lucy."
Right.
Chill out, Lucy. That's different than, "You're right, Lucy. You're always right."
Right.
It's also different than, "I cannot believe Lucy is still here. I spent all that money in therapy. I've been meditating 50 years. Why is Lucy still here?" So that's the quality we call mindfulness, which we call the place in the middle. You're not completely sucked into what's going on, and you're also not pushing against it, like hating it or being ashamed of it.
Yeah.
And that's what you call objective awareness. It's seeing with some space, some spaciousness. Anyway, so I was talking to this guy, and I was using all these examples, and he said, "Oh, what you mean is like I'm being bullied by my thoughts. And I thought that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's totally it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good, thank you for that story. Because we all have our own Lucy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I appreciate the reminder that it's not about pushing Lucy away. I heard some influencer recently say, you got to just cut that out of your brain or something, like you could, as if someone could take a scalpel and cut. I was like, dude, no, like it doesn't work that way. Like we've all tried.
Doesn't work that way.
The louder it gets, right? It pushes back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's a natural impulse in a way, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? It's like the proverbial banging your head against the wall.
Hey folks, quick interruption. Do you ever find yourself going in loops when you fight with someone and you can't get to the bottom of it? You can't get to zero and you can't relax and they can't relax. They continue to feel misunderstood. You feel misunderstood. You go your separate ways. You sleep on it. It doesn't get better. And hopefully time takes care of it. Well, if that's you, it's normal and understandable because you and I never learned how to work through conflict very well. That's why I created the relationship school, really. And it's also why I created a 2-day event that I want you to come to called Accepted and Connected, because that's what you get when you earn your way through conflict, is you feel accepted and connected. And that feels really good. It's what all of us want to feel, right? Conflict's normal, but it's important to learn just a few things on how to get through it and how to get to zero and how to relax and clean up the mess after it happens. So come join us, okay? Here's what Peggy had to say about her experience.
So I came here to learn some new techniques about conflict resolution and basically how to, de-escalate conflicts, and this was a great learning experience. I'm in real estate and I deal with different personalities all the time, and it's an emotional transaction. So agents, sellers, buyers can get upset. So this is just a good way to use the tools to keep everybody calm and coming back to the table. The tools are really good to know just because if you're feeling activated, you're not working from the proper part of your brain to be able to listen and feel with your heart. Instead, you're in your head and coming from a more aggressive place of fear. So that's a big deal. And then just how to step out of that and then how to re-engage nicely without all of that tension. This is a really great learning tool, I think, for anyone. I'm actually probably going to have my children take this. I pretty much think at any age you could use it, but definitely at 18, as you go out into the world, to college, to new relationships, this should be a prerequisite for everyone, just to have better communication with each other and avoid those pitfalls that people can get into.
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. I am so with you. Imagine if every high schooler got a class on how to work through conflict effectively and how to communicate under stress. Our world would be a different place. And again, that's part of my mission here. So if you want to come hang and play with us, do so. Our next event is it's in November, March, or June. So check out relationshipschool.com/connected, and you can bring a friend for $100. So come play with us. All right, back to the podcast. I always ask spiritual teachers or Dharma teachers or just people with your level of experience this question, which is, because I'm so curious what you'd say, is talk about self-love. I guess it's a lot more about maybe a comment that I'd love you to comment on. Talk about self-love. And a lot of people might think, okay, Maitri, right? I'm just sitting here and I'm just going to love myself. When we're sort of raised as children to love ourselves in relationship to other people. So I'm curious how you teach about and talk about self-love or self-compassion.
Well, I kind of start with, there was a line in a movie that I liked a lot, a movie called Dan in Real Life, which was, I don't know, maybe like 12 years ago or something now. And one of the characters says, love is not a feeling, it's an ability. Love is not a feeling, it's an ability. And of course, it's a feeling as well, but feeling is a little too close to commodity. And once it's like a thing, it's a commodity, then often we think it's in someone else's hands to bestow upon us, in which case there's love in our life, or take away from us, in which case we're bereft. Whereas if it's an ability, a capacity within me, it's mine. It's within me, and other people certainly might ignite it or inspire it or threaten it, but ultimately it's within me. So I used to get this image of like the UPS delivery person standing at my doorstep, looking down at the package and glancing at the address and saying, no, I don't think so. And like walking away. And I'm going, wait a minute. Then I have no love, which is, I think, the conventional understanding. But if it's an ability, it's inside of us to ultimately, nurture and generate. And so, of course, we appreciate immensely and are grateful for the people or beings who do elevate that sense and do nourish it. But we do also take responsibility. And the question of self-compassion is interesting because it's so different than actually self-esteem, which is also a notable quality, compared to only thinking about what a miserable person we are.
Yeah.
To take a moment and just appreciate something. But self-compassion arises when we have blown it, when we have fallen down, when we've made a mistake. And it's not to excuse that or pretend we're perfect or mistakes don't have any consequences. It's not that at all, but it's actually looking in a way at how we learn and how we grow and being able to look honestly at that and ask ourselves, well, is the day and a half I spent castigating myself and hating myself that onward leading, actually?
Right.
Look at how tired I got. Look at how demoralized I got. Look at how hopeless I felt compared to honestly acknowledging the mistake, the lessons learned, or making amends and being kind to ourselves, having that kind of compassion for ourselves. And you realize, we think of it as laziness or, being oblivious to standards of excellence. And it's really not that at all. It's a fantastic engine for learning something new or changing a habit or making progress.
So with you there. Yeah. And so can we love, do I need to wait? This is for the listeners here. Do I need to wait? Do I need to love myself first before I get into a relationship? And is that even possible?
I don't think, unlike many kind of people these days, I wouldn't say we have to love ourselves completely before we get into a relationship, because that could be a long haul and it becomes a project, and then we have the checklist and how do we know? And, maybe I regress today. It's like, you don't really want it to be a project, but I think we need to practice awareness and kindness with that, because of course in the terrain of relationship, many old habits come up and we see, I was afraid to ask for what I needed because I thought if I ever needed anything, I would be rejected, or I held back from doing this, or I distorted that, or whatever. And it's not always easy in the sense of our hearts to see all of that, but we need to have that awareness, and we need to have a certain level of caring for ourselves so that we can continue to learn and grow and be more truthful and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what you're saying. And I almost hear you saying self-love, self-compassion is a process, not a destination. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really good. And I think we look at, one of the things in a kind of refined practice of mindfulness we look at is intention or motivation behind an action. And it figures a lot in relationship, like we can give a gift to somebody and it might be a material gift. It might be our time. It might be our attention. It might be our gratitude. And that act of giving could come from lots of different motivations inside, but on the surface, it looks exactly the same. It's just identical. I pick up an object and move it forward and offer it to you. But what's happening within? So we can give somebody something, let's say it's a partner or, close person, because we want them to enjoy it. We want them to be happy. We might give them something because we feel we don't deserve anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so we pick up the subject and give it to them. It's a very different action
Yeah.
if you take in the motivation as well. And only we can know, we have to use our own mindfulness to see where we're coming from. And then we understand the dynamic much better.
Yeah. So to reiterate, just again, your point of awareness, right? Can we bring awareness to what it is we're doing, where it's coming from, the motives are, what the outcome I want is, what my expectations are, how I'm taking it in if someone's doing it to me. I love that. And we can develop awareness through being with ourselves, right? Sitting with ourselves. Meditation is one way to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you instruct people these days? Now we're much more educated about the brain and the nervous system and trauma. Over all your years teaching, I'm sure you've seen wild stuff in terms of what happens on the cushion for people in groups and individually. And, one of the first things I noticed was, there's trauma that comes up and traumatic memory and tears out of nowhere that are just like, what is going on here? And it's just a huge cathartic release.
Yeah.
At what point is a person need to take their trauma maybe off the cushion and go get help with it? And how much can meditation actually help trauma?
Uh-huh. I don't think there's like a formula for either of those two questions. Meditation is just a means of developing awareness and balance and connection and compassion. So I think all those things help trauma,
Totally.
whether the form of meditation we're used to, sitting still, sitting with your eyes closed, sitting for a certain length of time, maybe going on retreat where no one's talking to you, where no one's looking at you. We have to really question all the forms because there's a lot of suffering involved. And so
Yeah.
It's not like you need to do remedial work if you have kind of a traumatic history, but you need to not get caught in a kind of rigid interpretation of what you need to be doing. Because the goal, remember, is balance. It's a more balanced relationship, more spacious relationship to whatever we're going through. So maybe that means sitting for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I had heard in Burma, where I did some amount of my intensive practice, there's some monastery where the schedule was sit for 5 minutes, walk for 5 minutes, sit for 5 minutes, walk for 5 minutes. And I thought, why don't I ever end up in those places? They're making me sit for an hour, it's like
Totally.
so painful. But you have to feel really free and confident that you have the right to distinguish, between the essence and the form. And you can cultivate all the strengths of meditation and not be on retreat, for example, if that doesn't seem the right form for you. And of course, it helps if you have a teacher who has that kind of flexibility and can help guide you. So that, I think, is, really a possibility. And it's kind of the same thing, it's like we need to have a good personal and collective understanding of what the meditation can do and what it won't do, and what we can be skillful with. So, for example, I had a Burmese teacher who we brought here to Massachusetts in 1984 to lead a 3-month retreat, which I sat under his guidance, and several of my friends did. And we had never met him, and we heard he was a fantastic teacher, which he was, but he was also like incredibly fierce and demanding and intense. And one day he was doing a question and answer session in the hall, and someone asked him, how long should I pay attention to physical pain before I move my attention to something that's easier to be with, like listening to sound or doing something else? And it's a very meaningful question because we use physical pain as a template for emotional pain, for heartache, for disappointment, for, relational pain. So how long should I just be with it, focused on it, before I move my attention to something easier? And I thought, given this teacher's personality, he was going to say, you should be with the pain till you fall over. But to my shock, he said, don't be with it for very long. He said, be with it, go to something that's easier. Maybe you go back to it, and then you go to something that's easier. He said, it's not wrong to just like be with the pain and be with the pain and be with the pain, but you'll likely get exhausted.
Yeah.
So build in balance all along the way. And that has huge implications everywhere. Like in a time like this of so much suffering, it sometimes takes some intentionality to also take in the joy.
Yeah.
So it really means consciously moving your attention to that which is good. It's not a cop out. It doesn't mean you're afraid. It doesn't mean you can't do the real thing. That's what we need to do to have a better balance. And so, especially if someone is experiencing kind of the after effects of some kind of trauma, that kind of lesson is very important because we get into these superhuman, weird demands on ourselves. Like, I'm going to sit here till I break through to the essence of the pain and totally vanquish it or something like that.
Wow. That was I just felt my whole body relax. The more you keep reminding us about balance, it's really, really so good. And I'm thinking, of course, myself, and I'd love to get your opinion on my situation now. I'm like, oh, what's Sharon going to say about this? Because I can be ambitious, right? And I remember when I was meditating, I got into the Nundro practice and I was, doing prostrations, and I was just attacking it like a CrossFit workout, right? And I could feel, I was like comparing myself to my peers, and am I going to get there faster? And, it's just this whole neurotic display of like how I am, which I think the teacher was like, yeah, that's kind of the point, is so you can see like how fucking neurotic you are here. Without judgment. Can you do it without judgment? Let's see. Anyway, I tend to approach my life, especially when I get stressed, I go into this kind of like, oh, I've got to just push harder on the gas pedal. And I notice I lose creativity, and I'm not as connected as my heart. I'm more in my head. What's the instruction there? What would you tell me? What can I do even right now in my life when I find myself kind of,
Well, I mean, one of the benefits of mindfulness in a kind of generalized way is just an awareness, so that we can either viscerally in the body or just in terms of mood, we can feel the emerging of that old pattern, like not after 3 hours, but as it's coming up. And so that's our clue. And again, you really have to do it without judgment, because then you just get entangled in that, and it's very stressful. But if you can just see, oh yeah, there's that again. Like there's Lucy. Sit down. And
there's my ambition,
Lucy. Yeah, have a cup of tea. Like relax.
Yeah.
So you're not frightened of that pattern arising. You're not castigating yourself because of it. You're also not joining into it. It's like, oh yeah, there's that again.
Yeah. It can be so hard to see for some of us, especially me, when under stress, right? It feels like it's like this. I'm just kind of fused to my stressful moment, and in my perception, it's just like, no, go harder is the answer. And so your reminder is helpful to like, as soon as I can become aware of like, well, there you go, you're doing that thing. Let's just notice that and take a breath, and cool.
Like, I have a friend who describes herself as someone who could never say no. And so she was always sort of like miserable at work and things like that because she was doing too much. And so in her meditation, she actually consciously brought up the kind of scenario that would happen where someone would ask her something and she would, go into some state. And so she felt what that state was like in her body. She like learned it, the sense of panic that would overtake her, and even the thoughts like they won't like me anymore, but especially what was happening in her body. And that became her feedback system. So that when she was at work and was asked one of those very kinds of questions, she'd feel that sensation. And that was her clue to say, I'll have to get back to you on that. She couldn't say no right away, but once she bought some time, she actually could say no. And so it's things like that. It's just the learning.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Yeah. Great. Man, there's so many other questions I have. I want to start winding down just to respect your time. Just a personal question I'm just curious about with you. You write a lot. You've written a lot of books. And do you give yourself permission when you're on the cushion to write in your head and then you kind of jot down notes, or you have your computer there? Or do you say, you know what, this is not that time. If it's important, I'll remember it. Curious how you do the creative process there with writing.
It's somewhere in between. Like, I'd often say that the best writing that's just like occurred to me happens two times. One is when I wake up in the morning because the sensor is not woken up yet. And the other is when I'm meditating. And not because I'm trying, but because I just created some space.
Mm.
And I'd say like one of my biggest weaknesses as a writer was structure, which is kind of amusing because I always talk about how much structure is important to me in my meditation practice, like
Right.
having a method, having a commitment, like,
Mhm.
you know, but I remember the probably the most common comment I've ever gotten from an editor was, "How'd you go from here to there?" I thought, "I just went. I don't know."
Yeah.
And so, which is also about relationship. How does this relate to that? And
Mhm.
so, it's not like I sit down and try to think it through, but it just comes sometimes like, oh, this is how that relates to that. And I say to myself, remember this. So I kind of file it away, and I've developed the ability to file it away. I don't write it down, but I also don't say, "Oh, you will remember this." I say, "Okay, remember this," and I almost like take a photo of it in my mind,
Mhm. Nice.
and then I do remember it. I mean, if it felt urgent, and then I was really afraid I was gonna forget, I would probably break the meditation and write it down, but not often because then I would just be writing all the time.
Right. Exactly. And then, how important is commitment to one's meditation practice? You just sort of alluded to that. Versus giving myself permission. I don't feel like it today, or gosh, I'm having a hard day, so I'm not going to sit. I'm too busy. How important is like making a serious commitment?
Well, here I think self knowledge is a really great tool. Like again, I don't care about the form. It might be you're feeling really vulnerable. You want to practice curled up in the fetal position. That's fine. Or taking a walk, eyes open and not have that kind of
Mhm.
inward gaze. And I think anything, or drinking a cup of tea mindfully, just
Yeah.
some time of kind of getting more present. I've known friends, of course, whose teachers have said to them, "Well, stop meditating for a while. You're too straining, and you'd be better off just having fun." But I don't think they actually stopped meditating. They stopped that formal, dedicated period.
Hmm.
But there are those moments, where you remember to just take a breath before you react or something like that, and those are very valuable. My mind is one where the structure is very helpful for me, and partly it helped cut the habit of self judgment. Like, when I was living in India and I wasn't always on retreat, I'd be sitting and it felt good. It felt wonderful. I felt really peaceful. And I think, oh, great, I'm going to live here for the rest of my life, feeling just this way. And other days I'd feel hassled or tired or angry or my knee hurt and I'd get up. I think it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I went to one of my teachers, this man named Manindra, and described this pattern. And he said to me, for you, I have one piece of advice, and that is just put your body there. Like every day, just put your body there. It'll feel some ways sometimes, other ways and other times. It's all right, just
Mhm.
do it. And so, but if you start to feel like it's punitive and you're harsh, and you probably could use a break of some kind, but that might just mean a break in form. I just, I was talking to a neuroscientist friend not too long ago, and she said to me that in her lab, what they have found in terms of neuroplasticity and changes in the brain and all of that in terms of meditation was that 12 minutes a day, 3 to 5 days a week will do it.
Mm.
So that is not a huge commitment.
Right.
And of course, nobody really knows, what if it's 14 and,
Yeah.
but nobody is saying that it has to be 8 hours a day. Nobody. And this is for demonstrable changes in the brain, if that's your measure
Yeah.
of change. And I said to her, I'm the kind of person where 3 to 5 days a week is harder for me than every day. Because if it's every day, it's every day. If it's 3 days a week, it's Monday. And I think, let's start on Wednesday. And
Yeah.
then it's Wednesday. And I think I'll sit 3 times on Saturday.
Right. Exactly.
It just doesn't work that well for me.
Yeah. So self-knowledge, like we got to know ourselves and kind of know what our shortcuts, how we want to kind of cut corners and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Cool. Well, Sharon, this has been really fun. Tell us about your new book and where people can find you.
Oh, well, my website is SharonSalzberg.com. Spell check will try to change Salzburg to be like the city, but it's not. It's with an E, not a U. My latest book was Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. And I think I read it for two groups of people largely, although hopefully, it was weird. Every word of the book was written before the pandemic, except for the preface.
Mm.
Because when the publisher postponed publication from June to September, last September, I had the chance to write a new preface. And then I thought, oh, wow, everything's so extreme. Did I write a completely irrelevant book? But hopefully not. And there are chapters in there on moving from anger to courage, on moving from grief to resilience, on remembering to take in the joy, things like that. And I wrote it in part for, people who are meditators who really find themselves developing compassion, but find it awkward or difficult to take like the next step and try to bring that into their lives in some way, in a active way.
Mm-hmm.
And also for people who are working to help ease pain or suffering anywhere in the world, in any way, in their family and professionally or whatever, who are feeling more burnt out and overcome and maybe could use some of these tools in terms of resilience.
Yeah, I think the timing is actually extraordinary. I think it's really wonderful. Yeah. Cool. Well, one last question I ask all our guests here is one of our missions here at the Relationship School is to reach a lot of young people with relationship education and helping kids work out their differences with each other. Of course, adults need the same amount of help. And if I were speaking in front of, say, 1,000 high school students and you were whispering in my ear and I could only tell them one thing about relationships, what would you want me to share with them?
Oh gosh, that's a difficult question, isn't it? It's like a haiku. Like, what's the one pith instruction? Yeah. I would go back to love is an ability inside of you, because we're so dependent on the views of others, towards us, and especially at that age, and to kind of have a firmer stand in who you are and the gift of that, whoever it is that you are, and to see mutuality in relationship rather than just need.
Amen to that. Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Sharon. Anything else you want to say, parting words to our listeners here?
No, thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks so much for your time and your heart and what you're doing in the world. Okay. Yes. Sharon Salzberg. Amazing. Go to SharonSalzberg.com, and that's Salzberg is with a Z, not an S. BERG.com. SharonSalzberg.com. She's got loads of resources on her site, and if you're in the East Coast, at some point you gotta go sit with this woman in Massachusetts. But I know once we start traveling again, she'll be out and about, and I would love to sit with her, like just to be in her presence and drop into myself more. All right, cool. I think there was many takeaways here. I loved her Lucy thing, right? It was so helpful because we're so hard on ourselves. And I hope you take a note from that sort of playbook there that, so there's two action steps. One is, notice how hard on yourself you are. And can you take that kind of attitude that Sharon does with this inner voice Lucy she has of like, yeah, okay, thanks for sharing, Lucy. Not to try to get rid of Lucy, get her out of my life. Just, there's that voice again. And what allows us to do this is the second action step I want you to do, which is to develop awareness. And as I said, I think one of the most important things that any human can develop is this capacity to witness ourselves. And that is cultivated through some kind of mindfulness practice. And when you're triggered by your partner or another person, you don't get fused to your reactivity and act out from that place. You can actually slow down enough to go, oh, there I go again. Look at me go. Look at me just judging the shit out of them. Wow, look at me. I just want to eat sugar right now and I don't want to be with my experience. And we can just watch the display of our neurosis, right? And I think this is a critical life skill to be able to develop awareness, as Sharon called it. And so the action step is, I want to challenge you to sit right now, today, for 10 minutes. Turn your phone timer on and see if you can watch the display of how hard you are on yourself per action step 1, or just what's going through your mind. Gosh, it's really hard to sit still. Gosh, my knee hurts. Gosh, my back hurts. I can't do this. When's the timer up? To just watch, okay? With no other goal than to just observe, right? Excellent. Okay, folks, it's been fun. Good hanging out with you. Make sure you check out our latest trainings at relationshipschool.com/training. And come hang out with me, ask me a question. Be sure you're following me on Instagram at Jason Gaddis, Jason with a Y. And lots of fun videos there lately, okay? All right, take care and have a beautiful day, morning, evening, wherever you are. Talk soon. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships, and you are one of them, so thank you.